go. Cool. So I've gathered you here today to talk about some money. Talk about money. So we've got this network that has been started, and not like moving robustly, but there's like some groundwork. And this week I did a few things that are gonna add a lot of scalability. And actually most of them centered around MailChimp, which I actually kind of plan on using as like my control panel for brokering, because I can add tags and segment people, like add tags to people's personas or whatever, like their contact information. That says like what they offer and what they're interested in. And then as I'm like collecting from people like things that they're trying to sell, I can like send out like an email just to people who like have said that like they want a certain kind of thing. I can like craft one nice email and it can be really targeted. I'm in a barter network, and I get like every day I get trading floor emails, and like 90% of what's in the barter network I have no interest in, but I open every single one of them because every now and then there's something sweet on the trading floor, and it kind of bums me out like that I can't adjust that. So so I want to make that different for this network, and I'm really hoping to make the experience nice and smooth for everybody, and to like get from everybody really cool stuff and find really cool ways to proliferate it. And along with that scalability comes like my desire to move us into phase 2, because if we get like really far and I'm still kind of like juggling this benevolent dictator position with a whole lot of people in the network, it actually gets really difficult to move into consensus of all members like at a certain scale. Does that make sense? So, like the farther we get, the more people we bring on, the more cumbersome it can be to try to get everybody to agree on stuff. Does that register with everybody? Does anybody have a different experience of consensus, that it actually gets easier with more people? Because I would love to hear if that had ever happened ever in history. I've seen it done. I've seen it accomplished, but I don't know that.
Yeah, like I've seen it in groups up to 70 or so.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it past that.
I have a little anecdotal story, if you indulge me.
I would love to.
I had a friend who went on this tour. He was from the income sharing communes out in Virginia, Twin Oaks and Acorn.
Yeah.
And he went on this European tour of communes, and the first one he went to was 40 people, and he's like, okay, how do you make decisions? Like, well, we use consensus, but it couldn't scale. If we had 5 more people, it just wouldn't work. And then he went to the next place, and it was 60 people, and they're like, yeah, we use consensus, but gosh, if there's like 3 or 4 more people, I think it would break. And then he went to 80 people, and they said this the same thing. So it's I think consensus only works as long as it's not n+5.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And has anybody here ever met anybody from Mondragon? Just encountered or done any reading on Mondragon? So Mondragon is like we got Brittney joining.
This is a big old call.
Yeah, it's a big one. So the Mondragon collective, or I don't even know what it's called, like the consortium, yeah, is basically like the General Electric of Europe. It actually came out of the it laid low for a long time, but the syndicalist movement in Spain was crushed and obliterated, and whole towns wiped off the map in the 30s. But Mondragon later, once it was like acceptable to be a syndicalist, actually it emerged as this cooperative organization, and it's this worker-owned co-op of 80,000 people, and they mostly build electronics and things. Now they function using a spokes council, so it's still horizontal governance, but not everybody has to be involved in every decision. Actually, everybody can't be involved in every decision. but everyone is involved in choosing their representatives for their like teams, and their teams choose representatives for their industry, for like their specialization within Mondragon, and then there's a council of representatives that is accountable to various constituencies, and they make decisions. And there's a lot of movement and rotation from that council back to the ranks. But everybody's a worker. Everybody, it's not like there are people who are just like politicians or whatever, like just counselors and executives. Like everybody builds stuff in factories in Mondragon, which is a pretty cool thing, I think. So not necessarily trying to repeat that like 80,000 figure growth, unless we get some really sweet like infrastructure, but who knows? But I think it is possible to have pretty horizontally oriented decision making, even at pretty large scales. N+5, that's the limit. So apparently, so that's what we're trying to shoot for. Cool. It looks like it's time for introductions, because everybody who is expected has made it, and then some. So I'm Deacon. I started the favor, but I didn't really come up with it. I just got it started here in this time, in this way with these people. The mechanics are old, and I'm just really happy to bring this notion and this set of monetary issuance policies to people who can benefit from them. Anybody else?
Doing it popcorn style?
Yeah,
I'll go next, and
we could do it alphabetically.
I'm gonna
No.
implement the person who finishes speaking chooses the next person.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Drew. I do technology work, and I don't know. I love this idea of a complementary currency, and am available to do tech stuff for the community, and highly recommend checking out Loomio as a platform for consensus decision making. And I'm going to pass it off to Brittney.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hi, you guys. I'm Brittney, and sorry that this is the first one I've made it to. I was just talking to Elizabeth, and I committed to this platform, and then it's just been crazy. So I'm sorry that I haven't made the time up until tonight to join you guys, but it's a pleasure to connect with all of you. I'm kind of all over the place in terms of what I offer and the work that I do. Well, it could be seemingly all over the place. I am a brain wellness coach, so I do a lot with nutritional therapy, with movement, meditation, mindfulness practices. And then I'm also very involved in regenerative agriculture, and have just recently started a small mushroom operation here in the Denver area. So anywhere from, consulting with farm or garden design, any types of growing or regenerative practices, composting, to kind of the wellness coaching, nutritional therapy, yoga, movement stuff. And I will pass it to Daniel.
Hello, I am Daniel. I am just, I just popped in here because I'm kind of just trying to familiarize myself with the whole structure of this favor thing, and I'm kind of just here to learn, I guess. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, so I'm just here to listen, I guess, and I will pass it to Anders.
Hello, my name is Anders Benson. I am many things, and I think in regards to coming into this favor project, I would say I'm mostly a chef, definitely deep into permaculture design in all of its forms and dimensions, and I've been working with Deacon on at least one project, and have been starting other projects with a few of you, or touching base on things. And so yeah, I'm eager to see where this leads, and to have another way to create value and exchange things, and support a different local system, especially in the wake of all of this madness. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it to Ray.
Me? I'm Ray. I'm a gardener, I live in community. I'm really interested in kind of the underlying structure of our society and how that might be changed. And so economics is pretty key to that. I really don't know what this group is about. I'm here to find out. And I know Elizabeth. I guess that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Ray. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I'm a mediator, which is why I am not on camera and my full name isn't there. I try to maintain my neutrality when publicly facing, just so that I make sure that my practice is inclusive for anyone who wants to do a mediation. My background, so I have a degree in peace studies. I was really involved with the Zeitgeist movement in Baltimore around the time of Occupy. And then we had a local currency called the B note that I was sort of learning about and trying to engage with. And then when I moved back to Denver, which is where I'm from, I got also involved with the Venus Project. So I did their point of contact training and have not heard back from them. So they've invested a lot in my training, and I don't really know where they are right now, but I think everyone in this time deserves a lot of slack. Just because of everything that's going on. And just so everyone knows, it's Deacon, Cal, Drew, Dan, Anders, and I are all in the current social permaculture class with Denver Permaculture Guild. So that's how I know all of them. And then Brittney has been my wellness coach through my kind of journey with neurofeedback, and she's been invaluable to me, and I'm really grateful that she's here and joining us. And I do encourage all of you to tap into her brilliance, because it has certainly been very beneficial to me. So thank you, Brittney, and I'm happy to be here. And sorry that my camera can't be on, but trust me, I'm here and I'm smiling and laughing and engaged as much as I can. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to Cal.
Hi, y'all. So I'm Cal Huss, and been attending these favor meetings as long as they've been going, I think. And I am here because I'm excited about, or I have been excited about, alternative and complementary currencies for quite some time, and I've had varying degrees of experience with them, and community structures that kind of work with them. And yeah, I've got a background in a number of things. It's hard to know exactly what I'm going to be offering through favors, so I'm excited to work out what that looks like for myself and based on what others need. But it could be anything from custom artwork to carpentry to like garden consultation, in-person therapy, or also in the mycological world, and could be making medicines and things along that pathway. So yeah, lots of things. And I like how favor is oriented to allow the facilitation for us to exchange them. I think we're done, right? Unless we decide to individually introduce the three people in Deacon's camera, which I think is probably a good idea.
Deacon kind of like went right by us.
What do you mean? Drew showed it.
Fine.
So,
okay, you're off the bat. Eliza, do you mind it?
Nice try.
I'm Ona. I feel like I've been part of the favor process since the beginning, but not seen I do editing, so I did some early editing of the whole plan and manifesto. I have a varied background as well. I'm planning on offering music lessons because that's my primary teaching background. However, I have a big background in editing and academic kind of grammar stuff. That wasn't very grammatically correct. Yeah, so I've been, I'm human, that's good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm nice, so hang out with me. Want friends. I'm also in this for community because I just moved back to Denver and I would love to kind of recreate a different community within this. Yeah, that's me.
Sweet. I'm Eliza. I joined Favor because I get to hear Deacon talk to y'all a lot. We live here. So I do not consider myself as much or as good a permaculture gardener as I'm sure a lot of you are, but I have been practicing that for like 7 years. So I do a lot of like landscaping, manual labor type stuff. I am a tile setter and also a poet. So I have books. I have a book. I have book. And I have, yeah, so what I'm offering on Favor is mostly tile and garden work. So yeah, do backsplashes, bathrooms, things of that nature. I feel like uneducated compared to a lot of the people here, but I don't know.
Pish posh.
Pish posh. I have a book.
Yeah, there are very few published authors in the Favor network. A few, but not very many, and
yeah,
you're most of them.
Yeah, and I've always been, as long as I've been cognizant, like pretty anti-capitalist. So I've definitely explored eco-villages who had alternative currencies, and been curious, been currency curious for a while. So
Cool. How do you guys feel about digging into it? Because this is probably our biggest call, so I have that the rounds they can get kind of expansive. So what I would like to do is review the decisions, which there needs to be some amount of consensus on from the members, like a functional degree of consensus from the members in order to move into phase 2, and actually see if we can start moving the needle on deciding some of those things. So I'm actually just going to share my screen because I think some of us have access to this document and not all of us. But I'm going to just share it via screen so we can all look at this. And I'm also going to punch it up a little bit. There we go. All right. So in no particular order, maybe in slight order, what constitutes a quorum? Like how many people need to be together or in on a decision? What communications obligations membership confers? What technologies are going to be used for communication? What constitutes a stand aside or silent consent in decision making? How will new members be invited? How will credit limits be changed? And then what can be hard coded is in rules of the system that can never be changed. And then intentions regarding decision-making processes leading up to consensus, essentially what process needs to be in place for decision-making as the system scales. If those things are decided on and they're really well understood, then in terms of decision-making capacity, we can move into phase 2 and start implementing those decisions and have that decision-making body in place. There's also a technological component. I don't want to move into phase 2 until there's a ledger system with a full back end and there's not a human checking every transaction. But that's not tonight's concern. Do all of those questions make sense to everybody? Should I give some background on why these particular decisions and not others? Give me feedback on that.
I'd love to know your rationale.
Okay. Anybody else have any ideas on that set?
Do you have a bullet points to phase 1 with that? Or?
So yeah, on phase 1, the agreement is just the like agreements and oh wait, no, that's the phase 1 plan. Everybody who is signed up, like we read through like this phase 1 agreements, and it was basically just their transaction fees. It's 1%, and I make all the decisions that aren't in the agreement and whatever. It's pretty simple because we only need a few bare bones agreements at this like really simple ledger system. But then when we move into this consensus governance, it's like what that looks like needs to be determined. And so the kind of the idea on the rationale is one, they're going to be members. So several of these have to do with quorum and stand-asides, right? And so that's what constitutes a quorum, what constitutes a stand-aside or silent consent, what communications obligations. All of those have to do with really one issue, one core issue, which is not everybody who wants to benefit from a thing necessarily needs to be involved in every decision. And Elizabeth and I have talked about this a decent bit, where sometimes actually deferring decision making really helps a system to move, right? Helps decisions to be made by the people who are most informed or dedicating energy and time to making those decisions. And so actually moving to consensus of all members doesn't necessarily mean involvement of all members in decision making, right? But in systems where you have a consensus process, but not everyone's involved, what inevitably happens is you get invisible structures that that make decision-making toxic. So one quick example. So I spent a number of years in the IWW, the International Workers of the World, or the Industrial Workers of the World. So it's the old wobbly labor union, and the local IWW, it had it functioned on consensus, but it was consensus of all the wobblies who were at any given meeting that had a quorum, and the quorum number was really low. So you could have a meeting if it was scheduled, like there was public notice, and if you had more than 5 wobblies, right? And so what would happen would be, but there were like hundreds of wobblies that are like in the union registered in Denver. So what would happen is when somebody had something they felt really, really strongly about, they would go around and they had like the contact list, and they would find people they knew would agree with them. Like there are a few big personalities that just had some sycophants who would like agree with whatever they said. And so when you show up to a meeting that usually had like a dozen people, and all of a sudden there are 50 people, it's just like, oh shit, Dave's got something on the agenda. Like, because you just knew, because like the meeting all of a sudden is packed because he got all of his cronies and all these like, like it was like mostly it was crazy because it was like mostly like teenage fast food workers that he had gone around and signed up for the IWW to stack the vote whenever he wanted to decide on something. And so all of a sudden this consensus process, or it was like a vote, it was like a consensus sometimes means like a majority of a certain amount with no blocks or something like that. Like there are a lot of different ways that things can be called consensus. And so it worked kind of like that. And it was terrible for decision making, because effectively what that meant was one like charismatic whatever, I don't need to call a bunch of names, but like one charismatic person who knows how to get into the heads of impressionable people or young people or something like that can make a lot of decisions essentially unilaterally for a body of people. And the structure allows it. Now that's a really extreme example, but if a group doesn't take care of the structure, that it puts in place for making decisions, things like that tend to happen when you get enough people, even accidentally. Just a few people talk to each other more often, they kind of become a de facto like it would be like so the 3 of us, we live together, we could talk about an idea for the favor, and that'd be perfectly natural. We wouldn't be doing anything to try to undermine the system. But then we come and present it like it's kind of like all decided on because we've kind of ruminated on it for a long time, and it wasn't transparent, and that can create toxicity in the system. What do you guys think about? That was kind of a big word vomit. What do you guys think about all of that?
Sounds like a lobbyist.
Yeah.
Someone who would do that.
Can you define quorum? I know
Yeah.
there's the internet.
Yeah. Quorum is the minimum number of people that have to be present for a thing to happen. So if anybody watched like House of Cards, remember the episode where a bunch of like the Democratic Party congressional people like just like were absent, like they just like played hooky, and then all these bailiffs were sent out and actually carried them, like went out, abducted them, and dragged them back onto the congressional floor. And this happens. It was to achieve quorum, because Congress can't meet and do anything. It's like a way of filibustering is to like play hooky from Congress, right? So it can be, you can also, create toxicity in that way by preventing a decision from being made, by preventing quorum from being reached. So it's the minimum number of people that have to be present for a decision to be made. So I'm going to put Drew on the spot.
Yeah.
Did somebody else have something to say?
I did want to say, I know this is hard, sorry that my video's on, but I did want to say that I'm grateful that we're being very thoughtful about how to create this process, and that we're also considering like ways that unofficially the process can be undermined. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think for me, I just want to put out there, like my value really is about like efficiency. And also I really value that the people making the decision are the people who, one, like have the knowledge to make the decision, and also who it's going to impact the most. So one issue I have often with consensus is everyone makes a decision, but then only a few people end up having to carry out all the work. And so for me, it's a matter of like equitably distributing the weight of, how much say you have. If you're not going to do the work and you want to have input, I think that's fine. But then maybe we weight your vote differently because ultimately you're not the one carrying it out. Same with like, if we're making decisions about something like interest, for example, that should be a conversation that only people who understand how interest works on a fundamental level should be able to vote on, versus someone who has no clue what interest means and doesn't really understand monetary policy or theory. Maybe their vote needs to be a part of it, but it needs to be weighed differently because they don't have the same knowledge and background in that and may not be able to make an informed decision. So those are just my 2 cents, and I am grateful that we're having this conversation. Thank
you so much. Was there anybody else before I put Drew on the spot and asked Drew Drew's dropping stuff in the chat?
I was curious if I could. I was just thinking to put a little side note on what Elizabeth just said. I think as long as the interested parties are not also those who are weighted disproportionately if they aren't either language well informed. So like, like for some kind of example would be maybe like a new city housing policy that would more greatly affect the homeless, but they don't perhaps have access to the discussions. I think it's important for us to consider the complexity of some of those, but I also agree that the weighting of a decision and distribution of labor, shall we say, is definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely. I think so. This seems to have come up twice in different forms, and I want to underscore it. Authority and effectiveness, essentially, authority and stake are 2 really big factors in decision making, right? So that is like how much a person really has domain knowledge and experience in an area, and then how much that decision is going to change their life, either because the policy is going to be imposed on them, or because they're going to have to carry out the policy. Those are both types of effect, right? So if the whole favor network made the decision that that the founder needs to spend 4 hours a day providing brokering services, and it was like, when we voted and I was the only person who voted against and everybody else voted for, that would suck, right? Like that. So it's a lot of it has to do with obligation and being imposed upon, and then some of it has to do with authority. And another thing that Elizabeth brought up, which is very important, is that economics is not a robustly, especially economics outside of market economics. Most people who have like an economics undergraduate degree have never studied anything other than market economics in their entire life. And market economics is actually not so much what we're working with here. Monetary issuance policy is a thing that only a few economists study, and definitely in graduate programs, in terms of like mainstream academia, right? One fortunate thing in terms of this network is a proposal that I'm making is that actually the economics aspects of these decisions, they're off the table. So there's that one bullet point at the end about what should be hard coded, and the monetary issuance policies, so things relating to like interest and such. Those things I would propose, and I want consensus of all members to move forward on what can't be changed, that as this system moves forward, the monetary issuance policies, the hard economics pieces of this system aren't actually up for discussion. And that itself, accepting that is itself a discussion that's worth having, but that is essentially a proposal I'm putting on the table. Now, the one exception to that is credit, like establishing credit and adjusting lines of credit, because that has to happen, right? And that is a matter of economics. Fortunately, though, that is actually a matter of market economics, which is the thing that we all learned about in school if you took an economics 101 class or anything like that. Feedback on any of those?
Yes, can I say something? Are we trying to find an alternative to market economics?
No. So market economics has a domain, and the domain is like, how do things behave in a market, right? And so most of what, so economists like out in the world have like two jobs. And one of those is like setting, like, is like helping to predict like what the market's gonna do. And the other one is regulatory compliance, right? And so that's why all people with like a marketing background do, like they just study that. So monetary issuance policy is very, very different than market economics. It's like, what do the mechanics of like how money is issued and created, how does that affect incentive systems, right? And so what exists in the network already is a set of issuance mechanics, which is very simple. It's the issue, like, so Ray, I know you've got a background in economics. So what we're using here are the original issuance mechanics of the Veerbank in Switzerland, right? So it's a zero-sum balance, but it's not a non-growth zero-sum. It grows with changing credit limits, and it grows when the network grows. So anybody can go positive, they can go negative, and there's no interest on going negative or on going positive. And that way people can buy and sell with each other, but the whole system across the board remains at zero balance, and that's it. And there's a transaction fee, 1% taken from each party on every transaction. Those are the monetary issuance policies. And the assertion I'm making is that it would be best if those just never change, because that's what everybody's opting into. And changing that kind of out from under people is, I would actually say, wrong. And so that's what's being put on the table. So there's not as much economics to talk about as there is like one big decision is like, what do we do if someone defaults or dies, right? Or wants to leave the network, which is kind of the same as default. Like that, it sounds like an economic decision, but it's mostly a decision of what do we want to impose and like ask of all members or of the network itself, right? So we could say like a person, if they're in a positive balance, their credits are distributed amongst the network. But probably more often people are going to want to leave the network when they have a negative balance. And so are we asking all members to are we just going to distribute their debt across the network? Or, does it, so those kinds of questions, which have economic implications, but it's mostly a question of just like, how much are we going to impose on each other and ourselves, right?
Yeah, and I want to just add that I think one of the things that I'd like to see maybe built into favor is some access and opportunity to learn about these economic things, because I think it'll be an easier discussion for all of us to opt into if we know the distinction between what is like a monetary mechanism, what's an economic thing, what's a just relational, how are we going to exist together in a group question. And I think, those of us who have a background in it and can facilitate, maybe we put together some information or like videos or hold trainings or something, just so that it's not like you can't then join a conversation about interest if you want to down the road.
Totally.
And that's the same thing about, like, I hear what you're saying about wanting to not have this change. I think it would be wrong to change an out from under people. I still think it's dangerous to put something on the table with no mechanism for potentially changing it, because then if something drastically changes, like I think about, what coronavirus is doing to our current monetary system, there is no mechanism for like, hey, if and when push comes to shove, we don't want to make it easy to change monetary policy. We don't want it to be something you can vote on, but there should be at least some mechanism for like, if this does need to be changed because of some extenuating circumstance, this is this process for doing that. And it's more difficult. It's maybe more like there are criteria about what is considered a big enough reason to change it. You can really lock it down, but I wouldn't want it to be so static that when and if a crisis happens or when and if push comes to shove, we're like, oh wait, we have no plan. And now we have to make it up as we go.
All right, this is really juicy. So it seems like we've hit on a bullet that's really worth discussing. So this is the consent to hard code, what can't be changed in the system. Does that sound like does it feel for other people like that's a really juicy subject to dig into that decision?
I would say that that points to sort of the larger, like the actual decision that's happening right now that I see is deciding how to decide things, and that falls within that. Like, and so like a solution that I'm somewhat aware of in terms, because what we've described here is, there's some questions that maybe we want to make very hard, if not impossible, to change. Then there are decisions that need to be made at a level where there's a level of understanding, or there's a level of the people who are making those decisions. We're like trying to scope how decisions are, who's making what decisions and how decisions are made. And so I think breaking out, so decisions where it's like Deacon needs to do something 4 hours a week, that would fall under a certain category of decision, like the how the system is run, on sort of like operations. And then there's like the kind of like larger like purpose decisions, or inducting people. How do we like issue credit? Like, what is the scope of that decision? Who makes it? Who's eligible to make it? And so I think you can there's a design process in determining what are the kinds of decisions and how are they made. So we might use consensus for large, like, decisions that all the members get to participate in, but we certainly wouldn't want to use consensus on like what the website color palette is. And there's and this is a problem that people have maybe not solved, but certainly figured out a lot about. And that's what the link I put in to the chat, communityrule.info, and it's targeted towards open source tech projects that typically stay in the position we are now, where there is a single de facto ruler and everything happens under that, and it works pretty well in a lot of cases, and also it doesn't work well. So yeah, was there something specific you wanted to ask me too?
Oh, I was actually going to put you on the spot for your facilitation, and ask you what you think is the best next step from your experience as a group facilitator. And I think that actually just that last thing you said, where you said it works in a lot of cases, but in some cases it doesn't. Do you want to throw out some examples of sticky points for going down that path?
The benevolent dictator path.
Well, you were talking about this organization or this set of, sorry, what was it called? The community rule, their system and the different options and the divergences there. Like, can you describe, like, so that we don't have to stop in the middle of this call and read through this website? Can you describe your experience of this system, where it is beneficial, what it works for?
Oh, so this is not a system, but it represents a number of, it has templates for how decisions get made. So right now we are, our decision-making process is benevolent dictator for life.
Yes.
That's you. You're the benevolent dictator. You hold ultimate decision-making power, but of course you are seeking our input, which I might put forward is what we signed up for and what would be a really great way to get us to this next stage, so that we don't have to, like, one of the decisions that you will make based on our input is the decision-making process. Like, we won't actually have to come up with that. Like, you'll make a proposal and you'll do all this legwork to make sure that we all feel heard, and then you'll just implement the thing that you get the sense feels best. So that's benevolent dictator. I'm going to just kind of read through these templates. There's circles where small groups run certain sectors of the operation. So you could have a circle that is like hard economics, and that circle is empowered to make decisions around hard economics, and you are defining very precisely what a group has domain over. So there could be another circle of technical infrastructure, and that circle makes all the decisions around technical infrastructure. And then the representatives of a circles meet in a council, and they coordinate efforts and determine the domain, and actually kind of define each other's domains. And so you're in that sort of thing, you're trying to push, that's like holacracy or sociocracy. You're trying to push as many decisions to the smallest number of people making those decisions within a domain, and then the large group is basically just defining what are the circles and what are the domains that they get to make decisions around. And then anything that like can't get figured out in those circles is left for the larger group. So that's probably where I would think would be a good direction to go. There's duocracy. Whoever takes the initiative to do the work decides how they do that work. So you could actually mix that into this a system. Then of course there's an elected board. So any kind of method for a 50% plus one vote from all members to elect a board that is staggeredly, is rotated out at a staggered, and then the board is empowered to make certain decisions. And we could even have a board that is only there to only has veto power to a majority rule. That kind of stuff is possible. Let's see, and then there's a few other templates they have in here, but this is just a great resource for templates for communities at our scale too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Do any of those mechanics jump out at anybody as really salient? And since I'm asking this broad question, I do want to just note real quickly, Ray, that you had some kitchen background noise, and so I muted you. So if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself at any time. But do any of those mechanics jump out at anybody? Well, I'll ask first in the negative. Does anybody hear anything there that they just don't want to be a part of the decision-making process? Sometimes it's an easier place to start.
Well, in thinking of how to answer the first question, I'll probably bring up a positive and negative response. But I think that for our current size, it does make sense to have something like an elected board or a trusted self-appointed board, just because when we're thinking about monetary mechanics, like everyone that uses a dollar and they know how to use it. They don't really understand the mechanics that went into the design or how the dollar works on like the grand fiscal scale. They really just need it to work. And I think that that's probably like, there's a reason that you said that only very few economists, and they're in the grad level, like really study this stuff and dig into it. And it's because most people don't have the drive to like study this stuff in depth, and they honestly don't really need to either. So I think it makes sense to have like a smaller decision-making body that does understand, like we do trust, kind of like Elizabeth was saying, like for efficiency's sake, we kind of defer to the experts on certain things and don't just ask for the randomized opinions of all who are participating, because it might not really produce the right results that the community needs if you do it that way. So I would just think that that seems to be a good starting point. And then as the group grows, we have to understand that the larger it gets, the further every individual is going to be from that elected board. Like, so if we're 12 right now and then 20 and then 500, like all those members are going to be pretty distant from this small board. So I think that circles is actually a really good kind of thing to move into as we scale. That's some initial thoughting from me.
Can you repeat the last sentence?
That is some initial thoughting from me. I
No,
really like that sentence.
No, that sentence is great. But something as we scale. Moving to circles.
Yeah.
Okay.
The circles model.
Yeah. I do appreciate that kind of having teams or like councils of people who are in their element.
Yeah. What you guys might have noticed is very similar to what I was describing from the Mondragon Consortium, whatever it is they're called, in Spain. Well, they're based in Spain, but they're they're pretty big now. It's a big company in Europe, and they function that way with 80,000 people, and they make it work. So that circles model scales quite a bit.
Yeah, a fun little fact about that is, I think if it's something like, you'll have to check my math on this, but if you have groups of 40 people, and then like those 40 people all elect one person to sit on a group of another 40 people, you only need 5 levels or something, and you can cover all 7 billion people in a decision process.
Yeah, there'd be a much better way of electing representatives than we currently have for anything. But yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts while we're sitting
I would
here?
love to add, just kind of piggyback a little bit on Cal in terms of this like close internal body in the beginning. And yeah, the whole economic structure and just understanding economics is super new to me. But I think in terms of just like anchoring into decision making, I also like feel very much called towards like especially in the beginning when it's small, of who wants to put the work in, and kind of leaning into, I can't remember what that platform was called, Drew, but the people that are going to be taking the initiative, obviously have a larger weight in the decision making. I think that would work in the beginning when everyone's obviously intentions are in this to see it grow and see it evolve, and that would probably be something that would be adapted pretty quickly with growth. But I think kind of paralleling that internal group or that smaller body of decision making, also those individuals that are willing to put it in.
Excellent. Thank you. I take that as very validating. So that's great.
And something to consider is that we can, so we could do something along the lines of, out of this group of 12, maybe 6 of us have the initiative to put work in, and that becomes an initial circle that acts kind of as a board. And then as we grow, those sort of the seats at the board become their own circle. So maybe I'm doing work on the tech side, and we define what my domain is and what I have the authority to just make decisions on. And then as we grow, more people join the tech circle, and within the tech, then it becomes a consensus within the tech group, making decisions within the domain that central body has defined that the tech group can work within. And in addition to that, we have the technological means to put decisions on a platform like Loomio, where you can get public feedback for decisions that maybe are non-binding, but you can do consensus votes amongst all the members around certain decisions, so that you can, as a mechanism for getting feedback. Because ultimately,
oh, you froze.
You know,
oh, there.
we want to empower people to, you know, we don't want a situation where every little decision is being brought to everybody, but we also want to make sure that we are utilizing all of the knowledge in our group. So you define what decisions a circle or at the beginning an individual can make within their domain, but then it create a culture of whenever there's a decision that anyone thinks maybe there might be more stakeholders and they want to get more feedback, you have a platform that allows that discussion to happen.
Excellent, thank you. I want to acknowledge Dan and Anders both left. Okay. So goodbye, you guys. You'll hear this goodbye later because I saw that Dan just intends to watch the rest of the video. But I know that I mentioned earlier that a lot of the decisions that are going to need to be made aren't economic. But I think actually I kind of failed to throw out examples. And so I think that we're headed in a really cool direction right now. And I want to actually kind of like stoke the fire of this direction by throwing out some of the kind of tough decisions that aren't economic that are going to have to be made. So one of them is tax compliance, right? So it's not, I mean, it's financial, but it's not necessarily, it's not really economic. So I mentioned earlier that I'm in a barter network. I'm in a local network that's a part of IRDA, which is the international business to business, so it's a business exclusive credit clearing system that functions in many ways fairly similarly to the Favor, but has somewhat different mechanics, and it's global. Some really huge businesses in it. And the way it actually works, and this might seem really weird, is that I actually fill out a 1099 and they give me tax information as though I was like a contractor about whatever exchange, like whatever my profits were, because they're basically earnings, right? It's like a capital gains kind of thing. And so they give me a document at the end of every year that says whatever I netted out in, so that I have tax liability. But that means that every member of that that network has to have an EIN to submit for that tax information, right? So if we were to go that route, which protects us a lot from negative relationship with the powers that be, which is probably a thing we want to avoid, getting on their bad side. It means that we might not be able to accept like undocumented folks, right? So that's a hard decision we have to make. And we have to figure out where we want to fall on that line and maybe problem solve around how to do that. And it's an uncomfortable decision. And I don't have a proposal for how we solve that, because I don't want to like go to jail for like helping, for like being a party to 100 different people's tax evasion de facto or whatever, like whatever it is they would charge me with or us with or whatever. I don't want to get in that kind of trouble. I also don't want to exclude people who are here without documentation, right? There's probably a creative solution, but I don't have it right now. So we have to figure that out as a group. I mentioned before, like the decision about what to do if somebody dies or defaults, like that's really a social decision. That's one of those community cohesive like decisions. It's not, I mean, it has economic implications, but at its most fundamental, it's a human decision. It's not economic. Privacy is another one. Right now, the ledger is like super public. And I told everybody that when I was onboarding everybody. It's just like, it's a very public thing. And the document itself actually appears in all of the first onboarding videos, of which very few are online. But it's private to the people that are on the document. So not everyone in the public can just access it, but everybody who's on that document can see everybody else's exchanges. And it's going to be that way through the end of phase 1, right? Well, I also want to put up profiles for who is available for what exchange on the Favor website. So I'm going to have to contact everybody one at a time and ask people about like what they want to be public and what they don't want to be public on that, because it's separate, right, from the ledger. But then there's this issue, when we create a whatever backend we need, there's going to be a technology team that decides how to implement things, but the implementation is going to have effects about transparency and privacy with spending for a lot of people, right? And how much we secure that, and what kinds of there are a lot of decisions to make where we might trade off ease of transaction or ease of brokering for increased privacy, and in some decisions one thing or another will have to give. So that's a kind of decision. How much we want to do in terms of security. Do we want to like create backups of the ledger? Do we want to move it to a blockchain just for like security's sake, not to like really get into crypto, but we can use a blockchain ledger to have duplication. And that might be more of a tech thing, but it might be that other members of the network have concerns about how redundant and secured the ledger itself is, and that's not really economic. And then there's how do we want to treat non-human entities like businesses, nonprofits, things like that. Do we want to let them in? Do we want to let them in with specific terms? Do we want to give them decision-making power? We're living right now in an economy where most decisions are made by companies, straightforwardly. Even if it looks like it's being made by Congress, it looks like it's being made by a ballot initiative, it was probably made by some company. That's the situation we're living in. And I imagine that the companies and organizations that we're going to want to let into the network are going to be different companies. But what do we want to say about the decision-making power that organizations have? So those are the kinds of decisions that we're talking about. So does that influence anybody's thoughts in terms of the direction we're going?
Makes me feel underqualified to make decisions.
One thing I actually really appreciate about doing projects like this is so I've come to, through all of my activism, when I was a teenager, I vitriolically hated the government and the establishment entirely. And now I've come to this place where I disagree with most things the government does, but I'm very grateful that the government takes care of just the hoi polloi, right? The government takes care of so much shit and just allows for general okayness, and it's never going to move things above a pretty low bar, but it's never going to let things drop very low beneath it either. And it's when you actually have to make these decisions, you're like, holy fuck, this is hard. And then you can feel a little bit of gratitude for just not being that guy until somebody like me comes along and just hey, guess what, you're that guy now. But so anyway, any other thoughts on how this changes things?
I have one, and I don't know if it would be a subcommittee or even one of those things to make decisions on, but I fully trust that everyone in this group is a very humanitarian person and cares about individuals, but I feel these groups, and especially if we're putting more weight to people who have experience in economics and technology and the nitty-gritty things that make the system work, I don't want it to become like say favor like grows, you know, exponentially or whatever, like do we lose that humanity when we're no longer like a friend of a friend of a friend who like is running the thing, you know? So I guess I'm just curious about how that, like how we can into the phase 2 like work in like what we like will not accept as far as like disconnection from how it's affecting people's livelihoods and lives.
Yeah, that's super important.
Yeah.
I think that's a great thought to in terms of like when we're putting, you know, if we go with circles kind of model, I could foresee us creating a role that is kind of like an auditor role that looks at the decisions that are being made. And, you know, and again, like with technology, we could say, okay, you can make, you know, you get to make any decisions within your domain, but you need to make those decisions public, or at least public within the organization. And then there's a group whose role it is to review decisions and say, ooh, that decision actually needs large, like there's a you know, there's a series of decisions we make that are around our like, this is how we operate. And then there's a group that audits decisions that are being made and sort of elevates them, flags them for like, hey, this decision has different stakeholders that you might not be taking into account. We want to make sure that they're getting in. Or this decision butts up against a kind of a cultural norm or agreement that we've made, and that needs to be taken into account.
Does anybody here have a familiarity with the organization Global Green Grants? They're actually like kind of improperly named, but it's a consulting firm of ethicists. So they're all like doctors of philosophy who have specialized in ethics. And most of what they do is they travel the world and they make recommendations to governments and to the UN. A lot of their work is just with the UN about where money should be assigned, right? So these are guys that make decisions about like whether or not a dam should be built that's going to displace 10,000 people. And like all of the decisions they make affect, like they're all like multi-million or multi-billion-dollar decisions that will affect the lives of tens of thousands, if not millions of people. And they don't actually make any decisions, really. They write papers and file reports about, you know, the impact, like, you know, impact surveys all over the world. And there's a guy that I know who used to be a philosophy professor at CSU. His name is Ivan Burke, who left CSU to work for Global Green Grants. And I talked to him after like a year or two of traveling around. He came back to Denver, and it was really fascinating. Like his work was like draining his life because he was seeing some of the ugliest situations in the world that different people were trying to change. But one of the things that boggled my mind is here's this person who is more brilliant than any politician that I know of, with more domain experience, more of a human perspective, has no official power. None. There were situations he looked into and saw incredibly clearly that he filed a report on that might be like kind of a weighty report that some politician would look at as a peer to a lobbyist's, you know, opinion, who has a vested stake and a financial interest and doesn't even necessarily understand all the implications. And those two things are just right next to each other. And there's some politician who has their own interests who actually is making the decision. And it was heartbreaking for me looking at that. And so I think like that idea of having like an oversight body that essentially all other circles are accountable to would be fantastic. And if that oversight body could be sourced from, you know, I mean, if we could have Ivan, that would be amazing, but we probably can't quite reach that. that far. Maybe. I mean, Ivan likes me. he might come in. I don't know. Maybe he knows. Maybe as an apprentice. I don't know. But what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say maybe.
Maybe.
I'm wondering, at least in the beginning, if that's something we wanted to implement right away. And I'm kind of seeing almost like the flower of life, just playing with the various circles, and then almost like a representative that could be elected from their individual domain, having a representative from each circle that, I think in the beginning, again, that's easier for those people to step into an overseeing position unbiased, hopefully. Obviously, as that would grow, I don't know if it would be as effective, but having, a representative from each domain then sit on that kind of overseeing board where they then convene about making decisions.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback on what Brittney's saying, that if there is such a group, I'd like to see them have some sort of compensation and favors for the time and work they put in. So this conversation, I want to be cognizant too of the time. It's 20 minutes past 7. This is labor that we're all putting into creating favor. And so I think in the same way that Deacon, you broker deals and we give a percentage of our deals to that. I think there needs to be some kind of pool to say hey, if you're going to take the time to design decision-making processes, get consensus with people, check in with people, show up to meetings, I think because we have something like favor that's flexible, it'd be good to compensate people for that in some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, love that idea. There's a lot of committees on nonprofit levels, and they have a sitting board, but then they'll have all of these committees radiating out, and those kind of sprout themselves based on need. You'll have the events planning committee and the financial committee, and a lot of the times you might have paid board members on there, paid members of the nonprofit, but a lot of the time it's all volunteer work. The hours that you spend sitting on the committee are not paid for, and I love the idea of acknowledging that as labor and compensating in favor. That sounds great.
Absolutely. I really like that idea. I do want to just for the ambiguity and because this is a recorded document, I do want to note that I'm actually not taking any cut of broker deals or any other work during phase 1. I do have a plan if I'm going to continue brokering, and brokering is going to be a service. I think basically brokering should be a service within the network, and it should be compensated in general. But during phase 1, I'm not taking any compensation for any of that work. Which also, since we have noted the time, I want to clean up a little bit of housekeeping stuff. That not taking compensation thing is a good segue. I just launched it, a Patreon for this kind of work and other things related to it. Some of you guys know the different things that I'm doing with martial arts, with economics, philosophy, creating materials around that, and social permaculture. Most of that work is uncompensated, and honestly, in my soul, I'm fine with that, but in my budget, I'm not. And so I'm dropping in the chat right here. That is the Patreon account that I just made. No obligation for anybody. It's out there. Share it, join or not, or bookmark it, or whatever you want to do. The other thing that I want to put out there is I want to stop just directly sending people emails, or even worse. I realized I had a lot of people just kind of camped as invited for this event. And so that means that it's kind of congesting your calendar, especially if you're not planning on making it. And so I set up, I think I mentioned this before, I set up the MailChimp, and I just want to make sure that everybody is just getting the invites and the notifications that they want to get is my main goal with that. And so there's this other link that I'm dropping in chat right now, and that is the MailChimp sign up form, where you can enter your preferences, and then through dialogue with people, I'm going to fine grain how everybody is tagged within MailChimp, so that when there's something to be sent out, like Anders is offer, like he's going to be offering duck eggs pretty soon, in like exclusively in Favor. And anybody who has told me that they want food in Favor will get an email about that. But people who haven't opted in for that won't, right? So I really want to make sure I do that, so that potentially the Favor could be sending out an email or a few emails every day, like blasts, but nobody will ever be getting one who didn't like explicitly want that specific kind of email. And I think that'll be that's actually one of the ways that brokering could be accomplished and not take a lot of like individual hand holding, which a lot of brokerages do, where like every single deal is a series of conversations between like a bunch of people, which I don't think needs to actually happen necessarily. We can automate some of this and see a lot of improvement. Any questions on either of those things, or thoughts, feedback?
How do I get on the MailChimp if I'm not?
You got an email while you were working, so it'll be so
okay.
everybody who's in the network who has an account got an email earlier that has all of the same information in it. So that's there, but not everybody on this call already has an account. I guess Ray.
I just signed up.
You just, oh, sweet. Excellent.
I really don't understand what it's all about, but I'm interested in finding out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This call wasn't mostly about that. I might
That's fine.
Develop like a 30-second or like a 1 minute, like a lot of the little details got sprinkled into this conversation, but yeah, it wasn't like.
I like that you're developing a system, and I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
And you're thinking deeply about how to do it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I guess kind of parting question. What, from the people who are here, what do you guys think that the next Fireside should be about?
I feel like continuing the discussion about decision making is
yeah.
still.
Yeah,
like,
I think it depends on what I think it depends on what the purpose of this is, because if the purpose is to like figure out who's that core committee that's going to start figuring out these systems, then yes, that should be our next conversation. But if the purpose of this call is to invite people like Ray and Dan who have information about, then this conversation isn't as helpful for that purpose. So if you could maybe define the purpose of Fireside, and then if the purpose is whatever it is, then that can help inform like what the next meeting should be, or like if this needs to be put onto a different meeting that's just for the people who want to make decisions about decision making, right?
Right. So with regard to that, I do actually have this intention of planning these a little farther out. And so then there's just like a calendar, so that in terms of the purpose of the Fireside, it can be super variable. But if it's scheduled and it's like, oh, this Fireside is about like Fourier Kipu and like, 90s like economic initiatives during the .com crash. And so it's just like, oh, that's going to be all history stuff. I don't want to go to that. And it's just on a calendar. And then that like the next one is going to be about like a subject that's like, core to this network. Then you show up to that one. That's kind of my intention with this, is just to be able to plan it out and tell people well ahead of time, like, this is what we're talking about at this time. But for right now, it's kind of like one step at a time, as opposed to like being able to populate a month's calendar. So I got like one bid for decision making, and my immediate thought was, hey, we actually sounded like we were in a pretty like kind of general agreement through this conversation. So I could come up with a proposal, and I could present a proposal next Wednesday. And then we could workshop that proposal. How does that sound?
I'm for that.
Yeah, I'm in for that as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and I like what you said about setting a schedule for these. I think that'd be really useful. Like if I knew like, oh, the third Fireside of every month is on decision making, and that's the one I want to go to. So I just want to cheers that on. As for the decision making, I think that's a great idea, and I want to commit to, over the next week, setting up a Loomio account to test out, and potentially like the decision that is being brought to the group would would be one that is like, this is how we're going to make decisions moving forward. Like that seems like the decision to make, because we could definitely like make a decision, some other decision, but the decision that seems most impactful would be how we're making decisions. And mainly I want to stress that a decision-making process that, like, I don't think that a call is actually the best way to make a decision. I think asynchronous is a better way, so that these calls can be more like discussion around the decision, like come to the call, make sure that you're read up on the thread from the internet, and then like let's get into the nitty gritty, and then after that the actual decision is put forward, and you have a week to cast your vote, essentially. Yeah, so I'd like to caution us to like try and stay away from synchronous decision making, where we like are coming onto this call and voting on things, because we have access to technology that makes that way easier and less time bound, so people can like participate in the decision making process without having to be at a certain place at a certain time. And then that also avoids that scenario that you described, where someone just stacks the one decision making meeting to get their decision made.
Absolutely. And I am super in favor of you setting up that Loomio prototype. That sounds amazing to me.
Cool.
Yeah, and I do like that idea of having another way. I feel like a week is a very short amount of time. Like I check my email once a week, so I might get it the wrong time and be left out of decisions and such.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know I'm on the outlier of like email checking in the world.
Sure. But yeah, as long as I'm around, decisions are not going to be hastily made. I'm totally fine with this going. Like you guys, anybody who's looked at the ledger might have noticed that like very little stuff going on. I just got the MailChimp set up today. Just got Patreon set up within the last waking period, because it took a few different little sittings. Like I'm like small, slow solutions like lead to like fewer stupid mistakes. Like the embarrassing mistakes, those are the ones I want to avoid. So doing things a little more slowly helps with that. Yeah.
I think I'm going to go.
Yeah, I think we're done.
It's very interesting, and look forward to hearing more about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for showing up.
Okay, bye.
All right. See everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.